Good morning.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, absolutely. May I ask you please to tell us your name?
So I am Karen Hurt.
And will you share a little bit about yourself? Anything you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, so my husband, David, and I run a company called Let's Grow Leaders, and we're an international leadership development company. I've written a couple of books, launched a book this summer called Courageous Cultures: How to Build Teams of Micro Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. Before starting Let's Grow Leaders, had 2 decades at Verizon. First decade was human resources, leadership development, organizational development, merger integration. Then second decade was a variety of field assignments. So led a large sales team, 2,200 person sales team, 10,000 person customer service organization. So been on both sides of the corporate world. And now as a startup entrepreneur, really working with leaders to navigate the workplace chaos and uncertainty and ambiguity that's happening right now through very practical tools and techniques to help people get results and stay a decent human being along the way.
Excellent. You and I have I have a similar company that does the same thing, except for I do it in the space of diversity. Very, very
Nice.
similar. So tell me, how did you happen on this company? What made you think this was a something the market needed?
Well, it was interesting because of the work that I had done at Verizon. My last role there was I led our customer service outsourcing function. So all of the business process outsourcers, the call center companies that were taking Verizon's calls. So 7 different companies, and they all had different cultures. And then I had different call centers within those centers. So I had about thirty different centers, maybe ranging from 250 people to 1,000 people, all who had their microcultures. And it was so fascinating to me because we did a lot of transformational work together as strategic partners. So, when I first got involved to take over that function, it was not in good shape.
Mhm.
So Verizon had started to ramp up very quickly when they first started selling the iPhone, and it invited all these call centers to ramp quickly. And you can't bring up a center super fast, right? It needs to be a deliberate process. And so I think everyone had bit off a little more than they could chew. The customer's experience was not good.
Mhm.
So my role was, and my vision was, let's figure out how we can help these companies transform their centers to get to parity with internal centers.
Mhm.
Uh, and so as we were doing that, I was learning a lot along the way about how do you do this? How do you translate? Because it's one thing to have all the resources of a big company like Verizon, all the fancy training, all the fancy tools. These guys didn't have all that.
Mhm.
And so I was like, how do you break it down to very practical tools and techniques at the supervisor level
Mhm.
to help people get results without burning people out?
Right.
And then what needs to happen at a VP level in these companies? And what do those executives need? And how do we help them build their communication strategy? And so I was just taking everything I had learned over my whole career to try to help these companies, which was ironic because I was actually the client, right? And so it's a very complicated scenario. And as I was doing this, one of the things that I started to do was write down my values, write down my tools, write down my stories. And I started a leadership blog.
Mhm.
And my vision was, okay, well, all these centers, they can have their people read the blog, but I put it in the public domain. But I didn't really think, oh, let me start a blog for the world. I was like, let me start a blog for my little group of people who needs to get better.
Mhm.
And what I did not anticipate is that the blog would take off and get an international following. And then my phone would start to ring and, hey, can you come be our keynote speaker for this conference? When are you writing your book? I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I have this day job. So, but then I decided, well, what if I just did one keynote?
Mhm.
And so I was invited to go keynote the International Customer Service Association. And I took a day off from work and I had that keynote and I get off the stage and the guy who was keynoting after me, Shep Hyken, said, so when are you leaving Verizon? And
Mhm.
I'm like, did I say that from the stage? Because I was awfully nervous. And he said, no, you didn't. I can just tell this is what you're meant to do next. You are so passionate about everything you're saying. And so I really took that to heart and started to think about it. And so I thought, you know what? Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do next. And so I gave Verizon 4 months notice so everything would be a smooth transition. And I went out and built Let's Grow Leaders. And it, it was a slow build at first, right? You think it's going to be easy, like, oh, everybody's just going to hire me because I have this thing. And of course, it was rocky at the beginning, and then I'd have not enough work, and then I'd have too much work, and then I'd have not enough work. And it was but now it's been a journey. I met my husband along the way. So he read something. David was a blogger and had a small leadership development company out in Colorado. He read something I had written for HR.com, thought he had written it. He calls me, he's like, hey, we are so aligned that I just read what you wrote. I thought it was mine. So maybe we should collaborate on something. I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be nice. Someday we'll do that. Right. And neither one of us really thought much about it. We ran into each other at a book publishing lab where we were getting ready to figure out, how do you sell your book to a publisher? It was that kind of a workshop. We realized that we were essentially writing the same book. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, well, we could be competitors on this thing, or we could be collaborators. And I'm always for collaboration. I think that people do better when they're working in teams. And so we wrote the entire book. Our first book was called Winning Well, A Manager's Guide to Getting Results Without Losing Your Soul. We wrote that while he was living in Colorado. I was living in Maryland. A whole lot of stuff went on from both of us in our lives personally. We became really good friends during this whole process. My mother died. I mean, just like we had to rely on each other as we were doing this thing. Mm-hmm. And after we published it, we were getting ready to start all our publicity stuff. We realized we had fallen in love. And so we decided to get married, merge our businesses together. And that's our story.
It's a good story. It sounds like a fairy tale. Turns out well. So let me ask you this question. First, let me just ask the most generic. When did you start this company? What year were you founded?
2013.
Okay. So you've had 7 years now?
Yep.
And what are your greatest achievements, or what do you feel most proud about?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I certainly feel most proud about the transformative work we've been able to do with some of our clients, that where you really see a business impact, you see managers doing the right things, the results starting to prove. And, when you can, and we love working with clients over a period of time so you can actually see that happen. So that's for sure. We are really proud about our last book, Courageous Cultures. We decided to really take a very research-based approach to that. Mm-hmm. And so we collaborated with the University of North Colorado. We had a team of PhD folks helping us with it. So it's really scientifically grounded. Mm-hmm. So our first book was Our Stories and Really Practical Tools, and it's helping people. I feel really proud of this one because it's so in-depth. And I feel very confident that the research it's still very practical tools, but I feel confident that it's grounded in this research. So that's good. What has been the most fun has been getting to know people all around the world. We have done programs in 14 countries. And I had to count those the other day just for fun. And what's been interesting, and a lot of those have been in person. So we got to go to Southeast Asia, we got to go to Ireland, to England. So that part is just wonderful. And now that everything is live online, it makes it even easier to do things, and we can be more accessible. So, we did a program in Lebanon the other day, in the Philippines, and, and then it's funny, you can get to the end of the day. Like last week, we got to the end of the day and we're like, Friday. We literally help leaders in 10 different countries this week. And that makes you feel really good that you're making an impact that will last beyond yourself,
Yeah. Well, that's very, very helpful to know. So let me ask you some of the awkward questions. So how many of these companies, persons, and people that you work with are persons of color?
It really varies, certainly in our international programs that, like if we're working in India, so it really depends. And, you're working, sometimes you'll be working in a government agency and almost everyone is a person of color. Sometimes you will be working in an engineering firm and there's zero diversity. I'll be honest with you. Like we had one client, it was a group of engineers, and everyone in the room was a white male except for one white woman. And she was like the HR person. Yeah. And that is a part of the conversation that we have to have, right? And so as that's part of what we do. We are not a diversity consulting firm by any stretch of the imagination, but we do help people get that perspective and then bring in the right and partner with the right expertise for that. But I also know to stay in my lane a little bit about that, because there are people who really know are experts in that field.
Well, you certainly should partner with me and my organization. But what I'm really getting at is, like, I mean, I think we all know that the world is not all white. So, there's diversity all across the world. And I use an analogy, and some people find it shocking that I use this analogy. But Mother Nature is probably the greatest diversity officer in the world. Just absolutely the greatest. Because when you walk out your door, there's not a single pine tree. There's not a single magnolia tree or oak tree or whatever flower, whatever you can name it, creatures on the ground. I mean, like, things that I had never even thought about until I started doing my work in this area. It's like how many different versions of a flower there are. So if you think of a rose, how many versions of a rose there is. Or if you think like a rabbit or a fox or an elephant or anything, there's not one. There is variations in everything. And somehow we as mankind, who are supposed to be the smartest people on the planet, we all have all the answers, have not figured out that superiority is inferiority, right? So if I am better, if it's because my skin is white and I have blue eyes and I've got these things, I am better because I have these things, it's actually inferiority, because it means that I singularly am something that the universe is not. So if you look at the diversity of the universe and see why it's there, like, one of my favorite things is I did a talk to someone a couple of months ago about grass. So, we live in a neighborhood, and in my yard, I probably have 18 different types of grass in my yard. Why do I have so many different kinds of grass? Because I only want one, but I've got so many kinds of grass in my yard, and each one must serve a purpose because they live together cohesively. The grass that I want doesn't grow on top of the grass I don't want, and conversely, right? And so when I think about, corporations, I worked in both the private and public sector, diversity is a challenge for everyone. And, we all say we want it. We all say we believe in it. We all, espouse it, and we espouse it daily. I mean, so since COVID, we've been spending so much time talking about diversity. We don't need to talk. We need to act. And so one of the things that I did in my company, I started creating these digital subscription boxes. So like, Amazon or somebody will send you a subscription box to buy a different pair of socks every month. I started creating digital diversity boxes. One for individuals to create a brand for themselves, for people to define themselves. Because I end up spending a lot of time talking to women who are struggling in their career. Like they don't know how to make the next pass. So they've been in this job for way too long, or they've been doing this thing. And I am actually, I am my own client, because I was that. I was in this job where I didn't feel wanted, didn't feel appreciated. Everything I did was minimized, so, getting out of that. So that branding box. And then there's a digital diversity box for the diversity officer, right? So this person is bombarded with all these issues that exist in the organization within diversity, whether it's, microaggressions or, out and out, discrimination or racism. And then there's that organization. So those C-level, or those high leaders, are they really putting in place practices and policies that actually bring diversity together? And do they understand that the correlation between diversity is equal to profits, right? And I'll give you my best example of that is in 2015, Google released this facial recognition software. I talk about this a lot, so people probably tired of hearing me say this, but they released their Google facial recognition software. Beautiful product, absolutely sensational. They got it all right, except for one thing. Every time it saw a person with a certain complexion, it would put up a picture of a gorilla. Now,
Oh
you and I both
no.
know that Google did not do that. Google is a good company. They have good intentions. But the problem is if you don't think about diversity, and I'm just not talking about diversity of persons, but the diversity of ideas, of actions, of thoughts and persons, combine them together to define diversity, your outcomes are not going to be good. You can put as many powerful white women, white men, whatever you want together. If you don't include diversity, meaning people who think differently from that. So, for example, where you went to school and how you learned in school is probably different how I learned in school. So if you and I were on a committee working on something together, you're going to bring your background, your foundation, and I'm going to bring mine, right? And so together we will make a superior product versus you bringing yours or me bringing mine. But together, if we bring in that diversity of people who have come from different backgrounds, different levels of experience, different ethnicities, all of these things together, you get a better product because someone's always going to see the little holes in it, those little gaps that you missed, and so to me, when I hear about companies, and I think your company is an exception, it's great that you are doing this, and it's great that you are able to make the impact that you are. But to me, what's missing from all of these companies are you also bringing the need for them to understand how important diversity is. So if things stay as they are, in other words, if COVID doesn't kill all of us off in the next year or so, there will be parity by 2040, 2050. There will be no majority race. There will be no whites won't be the majority, blacks or browns or whatever. There will be just people. How are we planning to deal with that? How is your organization planning to deal with that when your corporations now will have more people of color, more women, because women now are getting more college degrees than any other sector. How are these organizations preparing to deal with that? So as you are, thinking of all the things you did, the book you just described sounds wonderful and all these things, but how are you thinking about the changes that are coming around us, the browning and graying of America, the millennials and the way they think about things? How are you integrating that into your company?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really about how, the tools and techniques that we use are how do you tap into the very best thinking of every employee in your organization. So, it starts with, what we call navigating the narrative. And that's people's, what is preventing people from speaking up? And that's, what our research really looked into. 40% of the reason people say they're not speaking up is because of fear. They lack the confidence to share. Well, where is that fear coming from? And, when we worked with, Dr. Amy Edmondson wrote the foreword to our book, and she wrote The Fearless Organization. And, people are more likely to remember a negative experience than a positive experience. So we've got to be able to create a safe place for people to have the conversations of what is in their past and how that is informing their confidence to share ideas. And that people's experiences are different. And we can't pretend to just assume that, well, they should just speak up. I don't know what their problem is, right? And as a woman of color, it may have been your set of experiences may be radically different than my set of experiences. And what could feel very easy for me, and I'm like, just speak up, will not. You're like, no, because this happened, that happened, that happened, and that was real. And so we have to be able to help people have those conversations. And then, it's really being very clear. And we talk about creating clarity around two things: that you really do value everyone's ideas. You really do want people to speak up, and what a great idea would accomplish. Because a lot of times when people say, my team isn't just strategic, or she can't be in succession planning because she's just not a good critical thinker. It's not that we're born that way, right? And so here's the thing: when people say they're not strategic, people are not being strategic, or they're not critical thinker, first thing I will say is, do they have enough information to be strategic? And so that's, talk about democratizing. Like, are you giving people access enough to the strategy so that they understand where they can add more value, what ideas can bring up? And then really being very curious and going out and giving leaders and managers and frontline supervisors the tools and techniques to go invite people to bring their best ideas. And then giving every employee a way to think about their ideas and position those ideas in a way that's more likely to be heard. So for example, I mean, this is, if you can teach every employee to say, if you've got a great idea, don't just like lob it at me, But tell me why we have this idea model: I, interesting; D, doable; E, engaging; A, what is a couple of key actions. So if you teach everyone, if you've got a great idea, think about I, why is it strategically aligned with where we're headed? D, is it doable? Why, how could we pull that off right now? Is it something we have agency for? E, is it engaging? Who else might think it's a good idea? Who else do we need to engage in this process? And A, what would you recommend a couple of next steps? If you train everyone to do that, then it evens the playing field a little bit because we have a common way we're doing something. So, you could have Juan is positioning his ideas in the same way as Kelly is, right? And so it makes it feel safer to do that once we've navigated the narrative, and then we're arming people with some of these skills. And I think that's really part of it. And then I think also teaching people how to have um, manage the difficult conversations and be able to do that with poise and not react. So we've been talking, we were hired recently to work with a large company to help them with their post-election conversations. So, they said, prepare my managers to deal with the day after. And this is before we knew what the day after was going to be, right? And we're like, we're worried. Some were worried, we're worried there may be rioting in the streets. And what happens then? We're worried that there's going to be certain segments of our population who are very upset. What about the, if a certain outcome, people who are gay and lesbian, they're worried about their marriage equality. And so we have all of these conversations. So one of the key skills we taught there was reflect to connect. And you don't have to agree with somebody. Just, what I'm hearing you say is this is very, very upsetting for you. Do I have that right? And create and connect at a human level first. Listen first without trying to explain, counter argue, bring your point of view into the thing. And that I think some of those very basic skills for many organizations are where we need to start.
I think that's very interesting. I think that to some degree I would disagree with you because the human person, from birth to death, is a series of events. The president of Duke University said to me one day, we are a sum total of all the people that we meet. We are. And I thought it was a very profound thing to say because I never really thought about it like that. But, and I'm only going to speak for myself, as a Black woman, I've had so many negative experiences in my life. Trusting people becomes difficult for me. Because although you want me to come in, I'm using your company example, you want me to come in and express my ideas. Recently, maybe a month or two ago, I did a talk with the CISO of a major American institution, and she introduced us to a word called HEPEAT. Now, so here's a well-educated leader in charge of security for a university, a major university, well-educated, well-respected, well-renowned. She's sitting in a room with leaders, her boss, presidents, provosts, all these people. She's sitting in the room with them. And so she'll raise an idea and say, hey, I think we should consider doing this. And the room is crickets, silence, complete silence. Bob, sitting 3 or 4 chairs down, comes and he reframes that same idea. That exactly what she said, but maybe he moves some adverbs or adjectives, or maybe makes the verb plural or whatever. Bob, what a great idea. We should have thought of this years before. And the word she told us was HEPEAT, right? It isn't a thing until a man says it. And this is historically on our brains, in our DNA, that men are. And whatever you want to put after that, but that men are, and that women are. And then you start going further down the granular level. Black women are, brown women are, brown men are, Black men are, with the exception of Asian men and women. And even Asian women are not as high up the totem pole as Asian men. So and this is my work in diversity, in that in order to reconfigure someone's mind to feel comfortable enough to trust my idea, for me to step up in that room and say, yeah, I don't think that's such a good idea. or really think we should think about it from this perspective, has to mean that I trust this to mean when I leave this room, not only did they hear what I said, but this doesn't become a demerit in my box so that I become vulnerable to being, you know, having a negative review or being terminated or having something happen to me because I spoke up, especially if I spoke up in a way that the room considers assertive or aggressive, you know, because women are outspoken women are often considered aggressive, right? So rewiring the entire thought process of how humans work and how humans see themselves is not easily overcomable, if you will, because, you know, I see myself as I'm smart, you know, I have accomplished so much in my life, but there is a moment where I often feel I don't feel comfortable saying what I think.
Mm.
I don't feel comfortable speaking up because there are so many people in this room that have more education than I have, more experience than I have, whatever. Who am I to speak up?
Mm.
And I'll give you my example. I worked at a higher education institution, a top tier higher education institution, and they were considering a merger with another part of the university. And in the room with everybody in the room had every alphabet from A to Z at the back of their name. I mean, every last one of them. I had no alphabets. I had not gone to college. I had just been working in IT for a long time. No alphabets. And so as they were discussing it, talking about the finances, you know, the training, retooling of people and all of these different things, I said, this is not going to work. I was bold. I said, this is not going to work. You know, it's going to take too much. It's going to cost too much. It's not going to work. And the person with the most alphabets, he probably has 62 alphabets behind his name, looks at me and he says, who are you to tell me I can't do this? He says this to me, you know, in a room full of people. Shortly after that, I didn't get invited to those meetings anymore.
Mm.
Over time, my idea claimed the day because they couldn't do it. You know, there were too many obstacles, and that's what I was just trying to tell them. You know, I was just trying to tell them specifically from the technology point of view that this couldn't work, but it would not. And so, what lesson did I learn from that experience? What lessons did I learn? And am I carrying that lesson forward with me everywhere I go? Am I? So I already knew I was a minority, right? I'm a woman. I'm a Black woman. You know, so now, and I took the chance. I put my foot out there, and I stepped out on that shaky branch.
Mm.
And I fell into the ocean and literally drowned because I did. So when you're doing your work and what you're doing, is there some psychology or some understanding of the cultural structure of our planet and how people see each other and see themselves? And I'll give you one more example. So the color of your skin, if you're a brown person, the lighter you are, the better you are. So I'm not talking about white now, I'm just talking about brown people. So whether you're Black, Hispanic, Indian, Asian, whatever you are, the lighter you are, the better you are. That's a cultural thing that exists across the entire planet. Doesn't make a difference where you are in the world. Skin color matters. Sammy Sosa is a great example. So Sammy Sosa was a famous baseball player. I think he played for the Cubs. He bleached his skin completely white. He's whiter than you are. He has, you know, normal hair, but he's whiter than you are. These cultural things that people have about how they see themselves and how they think the world perceives them are really deeply ingrained in our brains and in how we see ourselves. You know, we still have caste systems over in parts of the world. How does the psychology of these things actually affect how you're able to do your work?
Well, you know, I think that it's, first of all, it's being aware that these exist, giving people, you know, we talk about this up, you know, that's when we talk about navigating the narrative, making it safer for people to begin to try some new things. You know, you know, I can't just tell you it's going to be okay. I have to show you that I am going to listen to your idea and I'm going to respond with regard to your idea. It doesn't mean we're going to implement your idea. The only way we're going to build the trust, though, is to be in serious dialogue with one another. Right. And so I mean, the more I can say is it's safe. You're not going to believe it's safe till you try something and it works. Right. And at least you're heard. And so I think that's why people need practical tools to do this. They, and it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to erase everything overnight, right? But it's one interaction at a time, and and making it a priority.
When you go back and revisit these companies, do you see your results at work? So do you see that there is more women, more persons of color, more people that are taking the lead in some of these things? Do you get a sense that you are seeing your work come to fruition?
Yes, and I think that's why these tools are so important, so that you can say, when you're pitching your idea, just don't say this won't work, right? Say, here's my, like in the circumstances you were describing, one of the things we would say, was there an opportunity there to take that offline? Because people don't like to be challenged and confronted in front of a whole room. So, are you doing it in private? Can you do it and take some of the emotion out of it? Because that's another thing that sometimes gets people not getting their ideas heard. They're overly excited or they're overly emotional. So how do you show up, in a more calm, deliberate place? Are you bringing all the data that you need, to be buttoned up? So that, have you done your homework? Are you positioning your key points in an articulate way? And so that you're empowering. So if somebody is lacking the confidence, you work with them on these tools and like, let's get prepared. Let's role play you pitching this idea.
Yeah.
Should it, does a guy need all of that? Does a white male need all of that? Maybe, maybe not. But if you've got some of these negative things in your ear saying, this won't work, you're going to even be worse positioning your idea, right? Because you're not showing up confident. Whereas I think someone who's had less of a negative experience in the past is like, I got nothing to lose. Here's my idea. Right. And so that's what we've got to help build the skills. We're all about being really practical. I'm not, the training that we do is not about digging into these deep diversity issues. That's other people's work. But we are about, how do you help people speak up? How do you take people's ideas seriously? How do you create an infrastructure for courage? Like, for example, onboarding. Somebody new comes into your organization. What do we do? Well, we tell them, this is our mission, this is our values, this is how we do things around here. Sign this paperwork. It's all about clarity. But instead, if you also said, we're going to do all that, but we're also going to show up really curious. Tell me about, so this is our mission. Tell me about what your past company does that's better than what you think we're doing in this arena. What was your first impression when you walked in the door? What were some of the things that you saw? What do you see as opportunities? Because we really do care what you think, and building that from the very beginning and then proving it by taking their ideas seriously. And when we talk about respond with regard, it's really, whether or not you can use the idea or not, that's not really the issue. The issue is, do I feel like my idea was valued? So say, you want to always respond with gratitude, information, and an invitation. Gratitude. Thank you so much for thinking about our strategic direction. So here's an example. One of our team members came to us the other day with an idea that we are not going to use. I mean, it's like, we're headed in this direction strategically. This idea was to go that direction. But we still want her bringing ideas, right? So we said, you know what? Thank you so much for caring about our business enough that you are really thinking out of the box. And that's that is a really neat idea. And if we were going in this direction, we would definitely be talking with you more about it. Here's the thing, we're not going to do that because we have limited bandwidth, limited resources. We're in the middle of COVID. We're on a fast pivot. We're going this way. That's information, right? But then an invitation. If you have any ideas of how we can do this better, I really love to hear that, right? So she doesn't feel like, oh, I discounted her because of any story, right? But I still said no. And I think we just need to do part of this is just getting better at having those real conversations with one another.
I think those are some very, very valid points. I do want to go back to what you said about me doing this in the audience. So I want to describe this scenario to you, and I want to hear what you think about this. So there are about 40 of us sitting around a very large oval table, and each one of us was there for a very specific purpose. None of us were, somebody else's sidekick or something, each one of us had. So we went around the room, each person defined what they did. Then each person said, what their contribution to this meeting was. And I was the only Black person in that room. So I want to make that clear too. So we're all around the room, we go around the room. And so the person who led this meeting started out by telling them what the ultimate goal was and their time frame and, this, that, and the other, and their stakeholder issues, right? So we got all that out there, right? And so when it was my turn, you said, come with data. I came with data. I had everything you could tell them about why this wouldn't work. And I had given everybody a hard copy of this before the meeting started.
Okay.
And so when I was asked to give my thoughts about the likelihood of this succeeding, and I gave it, I told you the end result. So basically, who am I to say that, right? So I get it, because everybody else in the room was smarter than I was. They had more education than I had. They had more everything. None of them had any IT experience, but they had more everything else than I did. But for me, the lesson that I learned from this is to judge the situation from my gut, not from the smiles, the way people smile, or the things that people say in the room. Because, everybody in the room was friendly. When the meeting was over, they shook my hand, thank you for your data. This is really, really helpful. It's really, really a great idea. And they traveled down that trek after they left me out for another year and a half, and about $7.5 million later to find out that what I said didn't matter. So it wasn't like I was given an opportunity to say it offline, because I wasn't, because I didn't have access to those people offline, only in that space.
I see.
So when you're in that space where you're encouraging ideas, and you're telling management to trust your people, to bring your people in, to make them feel like they're part of the organization, you want to hear their ideas and what they're thinking. My diversity hat on. So when companies hire senior leaders, either they hire a search firm or they get their senior leadership team together. Rarely do they reach down in their organization and get their new hire or the person with the least amount of experience and bring him into that interview and say, hey, let's bring in Joey, because he doesn't know anything about leadership. He doesn't know anything about this. But what Joey has that all of those up there at the top echelon is he knows what the grub work is. He knows the struggle from the bottom, where you've been up there so long, the air is different. We're air down here, and so getting people to think about that. So that's one of my diversity things, so you bring in people who are different from you. Your senior leadership, most of you probably have very similar backgrounds, you similar experiences, you have a lot in common. But that guy that's down there at the very bottom or near the bottom, he's got a perspective you probably hadn't thought of since you were down there at the bottom, and that kind of thing is there. And so I agree, you're not going to change things with a big idea. And I think your company is doing great work, and it's great. The thing that it always concerns me is, where is diversity in these conversations, because, we want to encourage people to feel comfortable. But I would say if you did a survey, you pick any 100 people of color, and I don't care where they're from, and just surveyed them and ask them just some real basic questions. How do you feel about your job? Do you feel like your job values you? Do you feel like your job wants what you have to offer? You get more in the negative side than you get in the positive side. I'm sure there's some of them that are going to say, oh yeah, absolutely, my job loves me, they want me, whatever, I'm great. So the diversity piece of our work has to be included in the work to make our organizations better. So, I'm sure you saw in 2015, Silicon Valley has something like 3% diversity. And this is not including Asians, but 3% diversity in there in the organization. I'm not just talking like Apple, Microsoft, all of them. They all had these little small groups of people. So I just think that's an important piece. So I give you the remainder of the time to correct anything I've said and to make a point about your company, anything else you wish to say. Thank you again for chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I think you're raising a really, really important perspective that we need to be absolutely sensitive to. And how do you get the right people, which is all the people's voice, into the room? And it's not going to happen without deliberate effort.
Absolutely.
And so I really agree. I agree with you there. And, I would just say it's interesting because sometimes we can let negative experiences of our past prevent us from even trying. And, you could say, well, that's easy for you to say. And I've had times that as a woman, right? I'm 53 years old. So, 20, 25 years ago, I have my fair share of all kinds of stories of being talked over, put down, sexually harassed, all the things, right? Like everyone's, to your point, we are the accumulation of our experiences, right? And so I think, what can you do to control what you can control, position your ideas in the very best way possible, and to remain somewhat optimistic? Because I think the tragedy that could happen here is if we give up and we say, because this happened to me in the past, I'm not going to try. And sometimes I run into that, and that breaks my heart, because they are smart people with really good things to contribute who have shut down. And that is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so that would be my final thought.
Well, I think your work and your organization is great. And I think it should be made clear. And I want to make sure I'm saying this. You work at the company level. You don't work at the individual level. And that's it. And so I'm talking about the individual level, and you're talking, so your work at the company level is spot on. I'm talking about these individuals that are down here in the trenches trying to find their way up, that climb, and as what you just said, your experiences were, I think a great portion of women could say that is exactly their experiences. That climb is hard.
Yep.
You get knocked down, you have to remember to get back up. You get knocked down, you have to remember to get back up. So I think that we are talking apples and oranges. So I think your work at the corporate level and the senior leadership level matters a lot. And you may reach all the way down to the bottom of the trenches, but the idea is to get the senior level on track and give them tools to figure out how to make their employees productive and enjoy working for them and contributing to them. So I think that's to be recognized and cheered. I think that's an amazing thing that you do. And I wish you the most success with that as you continue to do your work. And,
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation, all the vital work that you are doing as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.